Hi everyone, I am K.Shivani from MCOM Previous. I am going to present a topic of purchasing power parity. First of all, what is purchasing power? Purchasing power is the value of a currency expressed in terms of the number of goods or services that one unit of money can buy. Then about parity, it is the state or condition of being equal. One popular macroeconomic analysis metric to compare economic productivity and standard of living between countries is purchasing power parity. It is an economic theory that compares different countries' currencies through a basket of goods approach. It was developed by a Swedish economist Gustav Cassel. Then meaning of purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity is an economic theory of exchange rate determination. It states that price levels between two countries should be equal. In other words, the rate of exchange between any two currencies is determined by their purchasing power in respective currencies. Purchasing power parity theory has two versions, that are absolute version and relative version. In that, first one is absolute version. In absolute version, the equilibrium exchange rate is determined in terms of ratio of absolute price levels in any two countries. Purchasing power parity states that price levels should be equal worldwide when expressed in common currency. A unit of home currency should have the same purchasing power around the world. For example, Big Mac Index. Big Mac Index is the way of measuring purchasing power parity between countries by dividing the price of a Big Mac in another country. This version assumes free trade nations and ignores the effect of transportation cost, tariff, quotas and other restriction and product differentiation. Then the next version is relative version. This version states that the exchange rate between the currencies of two countries will adjust the reflect changes in the price levels of the two countries. The proportionate changes in the exchange rate reflect the inflation differential between two countries. For example, UK had an annual inflation rate of 2%, then 1 unit of pound sterling would be able to purchase 2% less per year. When we add this on to absolute purchase parity, we can see the inflation rate will account for part of change in the power of currencies. So suppose that the UK has a 2% inflation rate while Brazil has a 5% inflation rate. This means that after 1 year the price of basket of goods in Brazil has increased by 5% while the same basket of goods in the UK has only increased by 2%. Then what is the relationship between purchasing power parity and gross domestic product? The gross domestic product is the popular metric to calculate the size of a country's economy. The GDP, by definition, is the market value of all final goods and services from a nation in a given financial year. However, the GDP figures do not account for the apparent differences in the cost of living in every country. Hence, fluctuation in the exchange rates can push or pull a country GDP ranking every year without accounting for the changes in standard of living. Hence, the purchasing power parity has become a preferred tool to compare economies based on their cost of living. Simply put, the purchasing power parity is equalizing the purchasing power of two currencies by taking into account the cost of living and inflation differences. Under this metric, economists compare the quantity of currency one needed to purchase a given unit of good or common basket of goods and services. However, it is difficult to compare the GDP of India and the United States on market exchange rates as it does not take into consideration the differences in the cost of living. But adjusting the GDP figures with the purchasing power parity helps economists make a more valid comparison between economies. In fact, the gap between richer and poorer countries narrows when one accounts for purchasing power parity. Union budget of 2019 shows that China is the largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity by $27.4 trillion. The US comes a distant second by $21.4 trillion. To be conclude that purchasing power parity is an economic theory that suggests the price of goods and services between two countries should be equal once their currencies have been exchanged. Purchasing power parity was introduced to be a more accurate and effective measure of a currency's power. It's split into two types. First one is absolute purchasing power parity, which does not adjust for inflation, and second one is a relative purchasing power parity, which does. Purchasing power parity is used to compare economic productivity and living standard between countries. It is used to measure GDP and also as an alternative to nominal GDP. The theory argues that tradable goods are more closely aligned with nominal exchange rates, while non tradable goods and services are closer to the purchasing power parity rate. Purchasing power parity can also be used to assess socio-economic situations such as carbon emission, global poverty, government manipulation, and financial market, and also in share trading to decide whether to hedge against currency risk. Purchasing power parity is found in everyday life to explain the differences in cost of living between two countries. There are significant limitations to the theory, such as its exclusion of their transactional cost, taxes, and barriers to trade. Thank you.